Form is the illusion of a 3D image in a two-dimensional work of art. We create form using value. Value is the degree of light and dark in an artwork. Applying this to a simple form like a cube, we see that each face of the cube has a different and unique area of value. The surface of our form that is facing directly towards our light source, where our light is coming from, we call the highlight. This will often be a white or a very nearly white value. The surface of our form that is facing away from the light source, but not completely away from it, is called the midtone. This is also often the actual value of the object itself. The surface that is facing completely away from our light source is called the base tone. This will be the darkest portion of our form. Finally, the cast shadow is the area behind our form that is being blocked completely from our light source. Now, not all forms are as simple as a cube. If we look at a much more complex form like a sphere, we notice that there are a couple more added areas of value. We still have our highlight, which is the area facing directly towards our light source. Again, it is either white or very nearly white. We still have the midtone, which is starting to face away from our light source. But between the highlight and the midtone, we have the quarter tone. This is the area of value that is blending our highlight into our base tone. On that value scale, it would be about that 25% range. Again, the base tone is the surface facing away from the light source and is still the darkest portion of our form. The reflected light is created from light from our light source bouncing off of a nearby surface and onto our form. This is very often a small area of value, and it's typically the same value as the midtone. And finally, once again, we have the cast shadow behind our object. Now, breaking down these areas into much simpler shapes allows us to more easily understand what these values are and where they're located. Here I have separated our areas of value into more general shapes. This is a good way to start off any work of art by identifying these areas of value in simple shapes and then later going in and blending them together in order to create a more realistic looking drawing or painting. Understanding how our light source interacts with the objects we're trying to draw allows us to create realistic artwork. So here we have our example of a sphere on the left with arrows indicating the areas of value, and we have a still life drawing with arrows indicating those same areas of value on different shapes and forms. We still have our highlight, our midtone, base tone, and cast shadow along various forms in our still life. Identifying these areas and blending them together makes these forms look much more realistic. Now that we understand the basics of value, we can apply these same ideas to the use of color. Replacing that 50% gray with a color, we can create a full range of value, again going from white into black. So looking at our cube example once again, we can see that our highlight is barely nearly white with a tint of blue. Our midtone is that 50% range and is the actual blue color of the object itself. The base tone is once again the darkest part of our form, being a mixture of blue with a shade of black, and our cast shadow is going to be a very dark blue. Now this is a form using just one color. We can also use a variety of colors in our drawings in order to produce form. Here we have a color pencil drawing that illustrates the use of color to create form. We can identify the highlights, midtones, base tones, and cast shadow once again. However, they are using a range of colors in order to create these values. Before we go any deeper into this, let's quickly review the characteristics of color. Looking at our color wheel, our most basic colors are referred to as the primary colors. This includes yellow, red, and blue. They are the building blocks of the rest of the colors. When you combine two primary colors together, we get a secondary color. This includes yellow and red combining to make orange, red and blue combining to make purple, and blue and yellow combine to make green. Then to create our third category of color, you combine a primary with its neighboring secondary color. So if we mix yellow and orange together, we get yellow-orange. Knowing these different categories of color comes in handy when we want to combine certain colors together in order to create a color scheme. Different color schemes that we'll be looking at specifically, the achromatic color scheme means no color, so this is just using white and black in order to create that full range of value. Monochromatic color scheme is like our cube example, where we are using one color in addition to white and black. The complementary color scheme is one we will look at most often. This is two opposite colors on the color wheel, including blue and orange, yellow and purple, and red and green. When you combine two complementary colors together, you'll get a neutral gray, which we will use to make darker areas of value on our forms. The analogous color scheme are three or more colors that are directly next to each other on the wheel. An example of this is yellow-green, yellow, and yellow-orange. And a triad is any three colors on the wheel that are equally spaced apart and form a triangle. For instance, yellow, blue, and red are equally spaced apart on the color wheel, as well as green, orange, and purple. And we can use these color schemes to create value in our forms. As I mentioned with complementary colors, combining the two create a neutral tone, which can be used in our darker values such as the base tone and the cast shadow. So in our example, we have a green sphere, and when we add red into the mix, we create those darker tones in the base tone and the cast shadow. These produce a much more natural looking form. And going back to our professional example, we see that the artist is using a triad color scheme of orange, green, and purple. In the green face of this creature, we can see that there are some oranges used in the base tones and cast shadows to produce those darker values. It's also seen in the areas that are orange. He has used some green in those base tones to make them darker and look natural. Now that we have reviewed how to create form from value and color, let's go ahead and look at what materials we will be using to do this. We're going to be starting with colored pencils. A quick review of what a colored pencil is. Colored pencils use a mixture of a pigment and a binder. The pigment is what creates the color, and the binder is what holds that pigment together. If a colored pencil has more pigment in it than binder, you'll have very vibrant colors. However, if your pencil has more binder than pigment, you're going to have very dull colors. If you ever purchased your own colored pencils, I highly recommend looking for pencils that have a higher amount of pigment in them. So when using a colored pencil, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. Always try and keep them as sharp as you can. A sharper pencil will let you create cleaner lines and create tighter details. One way of doing this is to sharpen your pencils using a sharpener. You can also learn to rotate your pencils as you are using them. This will keep your pencil sharp as you are using them to draw. Another thing to keep in mind is to glide your pencil over your paper rather than stabbing it into the paper. What I mean by this is keep your pencil tilted so you're using the edge of the tip rather than the very tip itself. Using that edge will produce more color over a larger area, making it easier to fill in spaces with color. It also prevents your pencil from creating grooves in the paper itself, which will show up later on in your final drawing. And be very aware of how much pressure you are placing on your colored pencils. The more pressure you place on your pencil, the darker and deeper the value will be. In order to produce lighter values, ease up on your pencil. Don't put too much pressure on it, but further on when you try to create darker or bolder values, you can start to place more pressure on the tip of your pencil so you can get those richer values. Finally, try and use a lot of layers when using colored pencils. Layering up on color lets you produce a wider range of colors, which is helpful when using one of the color schemes mentioned before. It is also far easier to work from light to dark. If you start with very dark areas of value first, and you mess up, it's going to be way harder to try and correct those mistakes later on. So start with lighter areas of value and then work your way into the darker ones. Now, taking all the skills and techniques we have covered so far, you're going to be using these in your color blending worksheet. In this worksheet, we have 6 forms, each with its own unique color scheme. Using your pencil and or colored pencils, you're going to be filling in each of these forms. Keep in mind where your light source is coming from and how that affects the areas of value on your forms. I've created several videos that you can look at that demonstrate how to fill in these forms with the different areas of value. And finally, I have a link to a video that I highly recommend you check out. This is a video of a professional artist using many of the techniques we've covered so far in a colored pencil drawing. If you watch this, pay close attention to things such as how much pressure he places on his pencils, and how that affects the different values he wants to create, where he grips his pencils, and how that affects the pressure and value, how he layers up colors in order to create new ones, and watch how he rotates his pencils as he's using them. This is often to keep his pencils sharp. So take a look at those videos and begin working on this worksheet. Try to use different colors in each color scheme in order to get a full idea of how these different colors will interact with each other.